The wind howled through the snow-covered forest, whipping white flurries through the twisted branches of fir trees as the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the frozen ground. In the midst of this bitter Alaskan wilderness, survival wasn't just a test of strength, it was a daily gamble. Every creature had its scars, every heartbeat measured against hunger and cold. For the bobcat known by the local wildlife tracker as Myra, this winter had been the cruelest she'd ever endured. Thin, but still strong, she padded silently through the snow, her thick coat matted with ice crystals, her piercing yellow eyes scanning the underbrush for even the faintest flicker of movement. A mouse, a squirrel, anything. Her ribs showed faintly through her fur, a testament to how lean the hunting had become. Myra wasn't just any bobcat. She had once been the queen of her territory, fierce and feared, raising litters of kits that vanished into the wild like smoke. But now she was alone. The last snowfall had been relentless, burying the forest's supply of prey beneath layers of ice. And as the smaller animals disappeared, the predators turned on each other, territories shrinking like melting ice in spring. Myra had avoided conflict as long as she could, but the hunger now gnawed at her relentlessly, and she was ready to cross invisible lines if it meant survival. A faint rustling caught her attention. Her ears twitched, head snapping toward a patch of brown brush partially buried under snow. She crouched low, her muscles tense, ready to spring. But as she crept forward, the sound grew louder, more frantic, and then she froze. Emerging from the undergrowth was not a rabbit or rodent, but another predator, thin, gaunt, and trembling with exhaustion. A red fox. Myra narrowed her eyes. The fox didn't notice her at first. It was limping, dragging a hind leg, and its coppery fur was dulled with grime and patches of missing hair. Its eyes were glassy, desperate. This creature, too, was starving. Myra didn't move. The fox finally sensed her presence and stopped abruptly, its eyes locking with hers. The forest went silent. No wind. No birds. Just two predators, both on the verge of collapse, staring each other down in the snow. There was no growl, no scream, only the knowledge that this could end one of two ways. Either they fought and one of them died, or they backed away. But neither moved. Hunger didn't leave room for mercy. The fox took a cautious step forward, baring its teeth faintly, though it was clear the animal barely had the strength left to fight. Myra's claws flexed in the snow. She could take him. One leap, one swipe. But something in her hesitated. Maybe it was the limp. Maybe it was the gaunt, hollow look in his eyes that mirrored her own. Maybe it was the realization that she had nothing to gain. Eating another predator meant a long, brutal fight and maybe a few bites of flesh before scavengers arrived. The fox lowered its head, as if acknowledging the futility of the standoff. It sniffed the air, then did something Myra didn't expect. It turned, slowly, and limped toward a fallen log a few feet away. There, half buried under snow, was something Myra hadn't noticed before, a torn canvas sack, likely dropped by a hiker or trapper months ago. The fox nosed it desperately. Myra stepped closer, cautiously, keeping a wary eye on the vulpine intruder. The fox didn't snarl or defend the find. Instead, it looked up at her, chest heaving, and stepped aside. Inside the sack were crumbs. Bits of dried jerky, shreds of cracker, and one moldy granola bar still in its wrapper. Not a feast. But to two starving animals, it was salvation. Myra sniffed the edge of the sack, then looked at the fox again. A pact was formed in silence. They ate in turns, one pawing at the granola wrapper while the other licked snow for moisture. For several minutes, they coexisted. Not as enemies, not as predator and prey, but as creatures simply trying to survive the same cruel winter. The light faded fast, and as the last crumb vanished, Myra expected the tension to return. It always did. But the fox surprised her again. He limped away from the sack, curled up in the snow beside the log, and rested his head on his paw. Myra watched him for a long time. She had no reason to trust him, no logic to explain the fragile peace between them, but something in her wanted to stay. So she did. She laid down near the log, several feet apart, close enough to keep watch but not close enough to provoke fear. That night, the forest held its breath as a bobcat and a fox found fragile warmth in each other's nearness. The next morning, the frost on Myra's fur crackled as she rose. The fox was already awake, eyes half-lidded, clearly in pain. His limp had worsened. She could smell infection now, sour and sharp. He would not survive long without food or help. Myra could have left him. She should have. But instead, she waited for him to rise. When he didn't, she took a step toward him. The fox blinked but didn't move. He trusted her, at least enough to know she wouldn't strike. For the next several days, they wandered together. Not side by side, but within sight of each other. When Myra tracked a hare, the fox followed the trail and distracted it, allowing Myra to pounce. When the fox found a frozen carcass buried beneath the snow, Myra helped dig. They shared without fighting. They moved through the forest like ghosts, ragged but determined. They crossed frozen streams, climbed snowbanks, and slept beneath broken trees. And slowly, something fragile began to grow, something like companionship. Myra had never known such a thing before. She was a solitary hunter. But the fox didn't challenge her dominance or invade her space. He simply followed, accepted her presence, and gave what little he could. When she found a bird's nest with a few eggs inside, she left one for him. When he collapsed in the snow from exhaustion, she waited instead of walking on. The survival pact had turned into something more, an understanding. A bond forged by pain, hunger, and silence. But the forest had its own rules. And not everyone played fair. One afternoon, as the pair approached the edge of a clearing near a human cabin long since abandoned, a low growl echoed from the trees. Myra stopped cold. The fox's ears twitched, and his fur bristled. A moment later, three shapes emerged, coyotes. Big, mean, and hungry. Coyotes were pack animals, and these three looked like they'd been watching Myra and the fox for a while. Their yellow eyes gleamed with predatory focus. They didn't bark. They didn't charge. They surrounded slowly, tails low and teeth bared. Myra stepped in front of the fox. It was instinct. She wasn't sure why she did it. He was wounded, slow. She was faster, but she was only one. Still, she stood her ground, growling deep in her chest. The coyotes paused. The biggest one snarled, testing her nerve. The fox, struggling to his feet, made a strange whining sound, half warning, half plea. Myra didn't back down. For a moment, the standoff mirrored that first meeting between her and the fox. No one moved. The snow fell around them, heavy and silent. Then, like a switch flipping, the largest coyote lunged. Myra met him in midair. The forest exploded into chaos, fur flying, snow churned, teeth flashing. The fox tried to help, but his leg gave out, and he collapsed. Myra fought with everything she had, slashing, biting, twisting. The second coyote joined the fray, and Myra was slammed to the ground. She rolled, kicking wildly, managing to catch one with a claw to the face, sending him yelping into the trees. But the leader bit into her flank, and she howled in pain. Suddenly, the fox did something unthinkable. Despite the pain, despite the odds, he lunged at the coyote on Myra's back. He latched onto its hind leg, growling with every ounce of strength left in him. The coyote screamed, whirled around, and flung the fox through the air. He hit a tree with a sickening thud, and didn't move. Myra's scream cut through the clearing like a blade. Fueled by a surge of raw fury, she tore into the remaining coyote, her vision red, her muscles trembling. She didn't stop until they ran, tails between their legs, vanishing into the forest shadows. Panting, bleeding, Myra limped toward the fox. He lay curled in the snow, unmoving, his chest barely rising. And as the snow continued to fall, covering them both in a blanket of white silence, Myra laid down beside him, guarding him once more. The snow had quieted, falling softer now, like the sky itself had grown weary of the pain beneath it. Myra lay close to the fox, her body curled protectively around his still form. Her flank throbbed where the coyote had bitten her, the gash leaking blood into the snow, staining the white with streaks of crimson. But she didn't move. Not yet. Her golden eyes stayed fixed on the fox's side, watching for the faintest rise and fall. At first, she thought it had stopped. Her heart slammed against her ribs, panic clawing at her throat, but then a slight twitch, a shallow breath, gave her hope. He was alive. Barely. Hours passed. The sun dipped low again, and the forest turned pale blue, fading into black. Myra knew she couldn't let him lie there much longer. The cold would finish what the coyotes started. Her own injuries were slowing her down, but she had to try something, anything. Slowly, painfully, she nudged him with her nose. No response. She pushed again, harder this time. The fox groaned, his body twitching slightly. His eyes fluttered open, dull and unfocused, then slid shut again. Myra stood up, every muscle screaming in protest. The air was so cold it felt like knives against her open wounds. She looked toward the tree line, toward the forgotten cabin she'd spotted earlier. Humans hadn't lived there in years, but animals sometimes took shelter in abandoned places, and she hoped, desperately, that this one might still offer refuge. She padded back toward the fox and nudged his body again. This time, she slipped her head under his chest, lifting gently. It was awkward, unnatural, and he was heavy, even in his frail state. But she didn't stop. Inch by inch, she dragged him through the snow, his paws trailing behind, leaving a thin line in the powder like a broken sled track. The cabin wasn't far, maybe a few hundred yards, but it felt like a mountain. Myra dragged him over roots and snowdrifts, past the log where they had shared the crumbs of food, past the blood-stained ground where they had nearly died. Her vision blurred with exhaustion, but she pressed on, driven by something deeper than instinct. She didn't owe him anything. He wasn't her mate. He wasn't even her kind. But something in her soul refused to let him die alone in the cold. The cabin loomed through the trees, half buried in snow, its roof sagging and chimney crumbled. The door was off its hinges, barely hanging by one rotted plank. Myra slipped inside, the temperature slightly warmer than outside. Dry leaves and torn blankets lined the corners. It smelled of age and rot and faint traces of old smoke, but it was shelter. She dropped the fox gently near a pile of tattered cloth, then collapsed beside him, her breath coming in short gasps. Her side burned where she bled, and her legs trembled beneath her weight. But for the first time in days, they were safe. Or at least safer than before. The night crept in, long and merciless. The fox didn't stir. Myra lay close, pressing her warmth into him, sharing what little heat she had. She licked his ear, then the wound on his side, matted, bruised, and starting to fester. She didn't know how to heal him, not the way humans could, but she knew enough to keep the blood from freezing, to clean the dirt away. Every few minutes, she checked his breathing, refusing to let him slip quietly away. By morning, the wind had died, and faint sunlight filtered through the broken boards above them. Myra awoke with a start. For a terrifying moment, the fox was still again. She nosed him, hard, and he groaned, a weak, wheezing sound, but it filled her chest with relief. His eyes opened, clearer than before. He looked up at her, blinking slowly, as if unsure whether she was real. For days, Myra stayed in the cabin with him. She ventured out only when hunger demanded it, her wounds aching but slowly scabbing over. She hunted sparrows and field mice, small things barely enough for one, let alone two. Yet she always brought food back, dropping it beside him. At first, he was too weak to eat. But then, one morning, he lifted his head and nibbled at a piece of bird wing she had left. That tiny movement sparked something in her, a silent joy she couldn't explain. As the days blurred together, the fox began to recover. He limped to the doorway of the cabin, watching her with dull eyes as she went to hunt. Sometimes, he'd curl against her in sleep, his body finally gaining warmth and strength. Myra stopped worrying he would die in the night. But the forest was still dangerous. They both knew it. Then one evening, the humans returned. Myra heard the engine before she saw them. A slow, rumbling noise cutting through the stillness. She stood at the cabin door, ears perked, heart racing. The fox crouched beside her, trembling, not with fear of her, but fear of them. A snowmobile roared into view, followed by two more. People in thick coats and helmets pulled up just beyond the tree line, dismounting and walking toward the cabin. Myra backed inside, low to the ground. The fox whimpered, his instinct to flee clear, but his leg still hadn't fully healed. He couldn't outrun them. Myra didn't know what to do. She had always avoided humans. Their scent meant traps, noise, fire. But now, she didn't have the strength to fight or the time to think. A man stepped into the cabin doorway. He froze when he saw them. "Whoa," he said, voice muffled through his scarf. "Hey, check this out." More boots crunched behind him. Another man joined him, then a woman. The woman's eyes widened. "Is that a bobcat? And a fox? Are they injured?" Myra snarled softly, but the sound lacked conviction. She was too tired. The fox stood behind her, head low, one paw lifted off the ground. "We need to help them," the woman said. "They're wild," the man answered. "Could be dangerous. Look at them. They're not attacking. That fox is limping bad, and the bobcat, she's protecting him." Myra didn't understand the words, but she felt the tension change. The humans weren't moving closer. Not yet. The woman slowly crouched and reached into her coat. Myra flinched, but instead of a weapon, she pulled out a strip of jerky. She laid it on the snow and backed away. The fox moved first. Cautiously, painfully, he stepped forward, sniffed the air, and picked up the jerky. The woman smiled. It was the beginning. Over the next few days, the humans came back. Each time, they brought food and kept their distance. They left blankets near the cabin, checked on the injured fox, and spoke in soft tones. Myra stayed wary, but her hunger overpowered her mistrust. She accepted their offerings, always watching, always guarding the fox. Then, one morning, the woman returned with a cage. It was large, padded with hay, and open at one end. She placed food inside and sat several feet away, waiting. Myra didn't go near it. But the fox, weaker than her, walked toward it. He hesitated, sniffed, then stepped inside. The woman gently closed the door. The fox didn't panic. He turned and looked out through the bars, his eyes meeting Myra's. The woman looked at Myra next. "We'll take care of him," she whispered. "I promise." Myra stayed still, torn between instinct and something deeper. The humans loaded the cage onto their snowmobile. The fox didn't struggle. He looked calm. Trusting. As they drove away, Myra ran alongside them, keeping pace for as long as she could. Her wounds reopened, her breath came in ragged gasps, but she didn't stop until the machines disappeared over the hill. Then she stood alone in the snow, chest heaving, the forest once again silent around her. She turned back to the cabin, the shelter they'd shared, now empty. The fire had gone. The fox was gone. But he wasn't dead. And somewhere, in a world Myra didn't understand, he was being healed. For the first time in her life, Myra felt something like grief, but it wasn't bitter. It was full of warmth, memory, and something soft she didn't have a name for. She limped back into the woods, alone but changed. The forest was quieter now. The storms had passed, and the snow melted slowly under the weak sun that lingered above the treetops. But for Myra, the world had lost something. Since the day the humans took the fox, the air felt empty, as if the rhythm of life had been interrupted mid-beat. She still roamed the same narrow trails, still hunted and survived, but something had shifted. She no longer ran for the thrill of it. She no longer slept with warmth beside her. Her dreams were filled with flashes, russet fur tangled with snow, soft whimpers, golden eyes blinking up at her. It was strange, missing someone she barely knew. Stranger still to feel grief for a creature she once considered prey. Weeks passed. Myra's wounds healed into scars, dark and jagged across her side. Her gait remained uneven, the limp a reminder of the night they nearly died. She avoided the cabin now, too full of memories. Instead, she nested in a thick grove of pines where the snow was thinner and the wind less cruel. She hunted sparingly, enough to keep herself alive. But she stopped singing to the moon, stopped climbing trees for fun. There was no one to watch, no one to listen. Some nights, she'd wander near the hill where the snowmobiles disappeared. She'd stare out over the distance, nose twitching in the cold wind, catching scents that faded too fast. She didn't understand why she did it. Hope, perhaps. Or longing. Or maybe just habit. But deep down, something urged her to wait. Even when the rational part of her, the wild, feral instinct that had kept her alive, told her he was gone for good. Then came spring. It crept in quietly, first as dripping water, then as green shoots cracking through the earth. The streams thawed, the trees stretched toward the sun, and the animals emerged from their hiding places. Myra watched it all with weary eyes. Life had returned, but hers still felt paused. Then one morning, while she tracked a rabbit near the old creek, she heard it. A cry, sharp, familiar, fragile. She froze, ears lifting. The call came again, closer this time. A soft, high-pitched whine, followed by a hoarse bark. Myra turned slowly toward the sound, her breath catching. She moved through the trees, cautious yet desperate. The sounds grew louder, more urgent. Then, as she stepped through a break in the underbrush, she saw him. The fox. He stood shakily on the edge of the clearing, smaller than she remembered, thinner still, but upright. His fur had grown back in patches, his legs still slightly bent. Around his neck hung a thin, frayed collar, light blue, with a metal tag that glinted in the sun. He limped forward, tail low, eyes scanning. And when he saw her, when their eyes met, he stopped. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then, slowly, Myra stepped forward. The fox's body sagged with relief, and a soft, rasping yip escaped his throat. He tried to run but stumbled. Myra met him halfway, touching her nose to his. The forest around them went still. In that moment, nothing else existed. No hunger. No fear. No species. Just reunion. Myra didn't understand where he had come from, or how he had escaped the human world and returned. She only knew that he had. Somehow, against all odds, he had found his way back to the one creature who hadn't left him to die. They returned to the grove together. Myra led the way, glancing back every few steps to make sure he followed. He limped behind her, his steps uneven but determined. When they reached the pine trees, Myra settled beside the roots of the largest one, and the fox curled against her, just like before. That night, she didn't sleep. She stayed awake, listening to his breathing, watching the rise and fall of his chest. He had changed, quieter, more cautious. But his eyes still held that same spark. She wondered what he had seen. What they had done to him. But she also saw something else in him, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. Over the next few weeks, they built a rhythm again. Myra hunted, and the fox helped in small ways, chasing prey toward her, scouting from high rocks. They ate together, slept curled up, shared warmth in silence. Other animals gave them space. Even the coyotes who once ruled that stretch of forest avoided Myra now. Word, it seemed, had spread. She was the one who survived the storm. The one who faced off a pack and lived. The one who protected. One afternoon, they returned to the old cabin, not out of need, but nostalgia. The walls had caved in a little more. The blankets were rotting, half covered in moss. But the air inside still smelled faintly of the past, of a fight for survival, of shared pain, of connection. The fox sniffed the doorway, then sat in the exact spot he'd nearly died in. Myra watched him, remembering how lifeless he looked that night. She padded forward and lay beside him. No sounds. No words. Just memory. But the forest, as always, had plans. It was a month later when the illness came. At first, it was subtle, just a cough. Then more. The fox stopped eating. His steps slowed. His body grew thinner, even as the land grew green and abundant. Myra brought him food, but he only picked at it. She licked his ears, nuzzled him, but his eyes grew dull again. The same look he had the night she dragged him through the snow. She knew. She had seen it in others before, the way sickness spread through the lungs, the way the body surrendered even when the spirit didn't want to. She did everything she could. She hunted the best parts of meat. She lay beside him every night, warming him. But the warmth couldn't reach his bones anymore. One morning, she woke to find him struggling to breathe. His body shook with each breath. He looked at her, eyes tired but still gentle. Myra pressed her forehead against his. That evening, as the sun sank behind the pines, he didn't wake. Myra didn't move for hours. The forest grew cold again, shadows lengthening across the earth. Wind whispered through the trees. She stayed beside him, nose tucked under his chin, as if he were merely sleeping. When she finally stood, her legs trembled. She stepped back once, twice, then turned toward the hills where they had once watched the world together. She climbed slowly, the sky above painted in hues of orange and violet. At the top, she looked out across the valley. The same forest. The same rivers. But emptier. She sat there until night fell, the stars blinking to life. And then, for the first time in many months, she let out a sound. A soft, low cry, not a warning, not a hunting call. A song. A song for the lost. A song for the friend who changed her. A song for the fox who never should have mattered but did. It was a long, haunting note that echoed through the trees and faded into silence. In the wild, they say animals survive by instinct alone. That emotion is a human concept, a luxury predators can't afford. But if you had stood there that night, if you had heard that cry, you would have known better. Because even in the deepest woods, even in the most unlikely pairings, love can grow. And when it's lost, the world feels it. Myra descended the hill slowly, her head low, her chest heavy. She returned to the pine grove, curled up in the den they had shared, and slept alone once more. But somewhere beyond the trees, in the hush between seasons, the forest remembered their story. And so did the wind.